Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this episode, we talk about developer conferences with Sarah Withee. Sarah is a polyglot software engineer who loves the intersection of where people and technology meet. She's an avid hardware and robot tinkerer located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the USA. Sarah is also a public speaker who has captivated audiences with both popular and powerful, technical and anecdotal talks. Her talents extend to teaching and mentoring, giving workshops to teaching programming and hardware building to women in tech, as well as students of all ages. Sarah has mentored middle and high school robotics teams to world championships, as well as built and programmed a few robots of her own. And because that isn't enough to keep her busy, Sarah has co-organised 6 conferences and is the Director of Programming for the Abstractions conference. Welcome to The Cynical Developer, Sarah.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for taking some time out from your what appears to be a very busy schedule.
You're welcome. I always enjoy being on podcasts.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's nice to get out there and get speaking in front of people. And even though I host my own, I would like to get out there on a few other people's podcasts as well. It's nice to get out and talk to people all over the world about tech rather than just those few people in your little niche, in your little local area.
Yeah, it's definitely fun. And I got to do my first podcast in London back in January, which is exciting and different and fun. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah, I recommend it.
Yeah, it is really exciting. We're here to talk about conferences, and I attended my first conference this year, which was NDC London. And
congrats.
Thank you. And I'm hoping to maybe talk at one in the near future. I've done a few local tech groups, so taking the podcast on tour.
Sounds great.
Awesome. So, for the listeners out there that don't know what a tech conference is, what is a tech conference?
Yeah, a conference, it's usually a collection of different sessions where you can go and learn different technologies or different like philosophies or ways of doing things. It's kind of like just a general education session for people in the technology field. Usually there's a lot of technical talks. Sometimes there's other kinds of talks on, how to do like development sprints better in like the agile world, or, if you're a manager, you could find some that have sessions on, building better teams, collaborating in different ways. So there's a wide variety of different types of tech conferences. There's some really specific, like a .NET conference would really focus on, that specific ecosystem, where there's some, like you said, in DC London, which are a little bit more varied and can have lots of different types of tech that are there. So, in different sizes, I've been to some that are about 150 people, and I've been to some that are, I think, upwards of 6,000. So There's definitely a huge variety in, types of people involved as well. So I think they're a lot of fun. I really enjoy learning, as well as kind of getting the surrounding of other people in the industry, especially outside of my own regional area too. So not just my coworkers I run into, but people all over.
Sure. So they're a little like local meetups, if the listeners have been to those, but on a much grander scale.
Yeah, definitely. Like 10 meetups together in the same place, maybe.
Sure. And unlike some of the local meetups I've been to, you get to actually interact with some of the vendors and some of the other sort of tech people out there that are, as I said earlier, a little bit further from your local area as well.
Yeah.
So we sort of said that they're bigger than a local meetup. Why should listeners really attend a conference?
Yeah, I think they're good because I've especially found the further you get into your career, the more you're almost sort of siloed off from other people. You kind of become specialized in specifically what you're working on, and you don't really get a good grasp for what else is out there in the technology world. I mean, you can always read a book on a new technology, or like you said, go to a meetup where you can maybe learn a couple new things. But I think conferences are one of the best ways I've learned to see kind of on a grander scale of not just what like the latest languages or frameworks that are going on out there, but see what people are doing with them too. So, there's like lots of talks with like machine learning, it's the biggest thing out there, right now. But it's another thing to go and see several sessions where they're using it in examples and saying like, hi, my company built, I don't know, we use machine learning in a library to predict what types of books people are checking out and recommend more books to them, and see more practical examples as well as how they might have coded them up, or how you can use somebody else's machine learning systems and incorporate it into yours. So I like that, I get a wider variety of education that's not just limited to like my local tech scene or whatever I could just learn in my own free time.
Yeah, sure. And I think a lot of the people, if you're listening to this podcast, you've already sort of made those first steps towards being more than sort of a local developer, if you like. And there is a lot more outside of your own little echo chamber, which might be you and the people you work with. And I guess that these conferences open that up even more.
Yeah, and one of the things I also enjoy about, since I've become a conference speaker and go to so many every year now, is there's definitely a community to it. And it's not always like, hey, I'm at a 2,000 person conference and I'm friends with 2,000 people. That's definitely not the thing. But there's something else to being there, and not just, like if you go read a book, that's it. You just know what's in the book. But, with these sessions, I can go hear from a speaker, but then go ask them like, hey, I was confused on this part. Could you explain it? Or, what might you do in this particular scenario? If I didn't understand quite how I might do a particular action with their product. And I like that it's more interactive that way. And I've also met a bunch of good friends from random interactions at lunch, or just from vendor booths. I've talked to sponsors. It's been kind of interesting, the sort of people I've met in the tech scene from conferences. And it's not just related to, I had a conversation with somebody. It's usually just kind of interesting scenarios from all over the place. And I've met some good friends over the years, which is really great.
Yeah, and I can definitely attest to that. NDC was my first tech conference, and I met quite a few people out there from all over, and some of them I still regularly talk to on Twitter. And how small the tech scene really is that I was talking to one guy who took one of the stickers that I have for the podcast. He slapped that on his laptop, and then a couple of weeks later he was back home in the States at another conference, all that be a smaller one, and there was people over there that knew it, and that was quite kind of a weird sort of scenario where I kind of feel like I've made it as a podcast. My stickers have been seen in the wild, not directly by someone I've given the sticker to.
Yeah. And, kind of a similar example, I was at a conference in my hometown a couple years ago, and this guy, I think he's from Australia, and he was living in Europe at the time, but he had flown in for this conference, and we were talking at an event after, and he was just like, wait, you're Sarah? Oh my gosh, I've seen like some of your talks and I've read your stuff on Twitter, and you're just so cool. I'm so glad to meet you. And it was really weird to think like, wow, people have heard of me in Europe/Australia. And, in some ways it, there's definitely way too many developers. You couldn't possibly meet them all. But sometimes, there is that small world thing where sometimes you can find bonds in people that you wouldn't normally expect.
Yeah, and I think that's quite a hard thing to do as well for a lot of developers, is the fact that we're very introverted in general, or to cast a generalization over everybody. So I know that when I was at NDC, I didn't speak to as many people as I would like to. It was quite hard to get in and talk to them. But there was a lot of side-eyeing, and I was monitoring stats and things like that, and I could see people were looking at the hoodies and that I had on, and they were going in, they were checking the website and things like that. But going up to people and talking to them, I think that's a very untapped market for people attending these sorts of events.
Yeah, and I definitely do think, introverts are probably the majority of the developer world. But, and I think that does make some conferences a little intimidating, just like, oh my God, there's 2,000 people at this thing. Like, I couldn't possibly ever go to that. But I think you think when you go to only one session, there's a lot fewer people in the room. When you're at lunch, you're at a table with maybe 8 people. When you're, walking around the hall, you have just minor interactions. You're never really interacting with 2,000 people at once. So I think when you get used to your first conference or two, they become a little easier to not get overwhelmed by.
Yeah.
And there's small conferences you can always start with too.
Yeah, and it's a good point that these tech conferences aren't just about learning tech. They're also about networking and getting to know other people in the in the industry that you never know might help you at some point in the future.
Yeah, I went to Strange Loop, which is in St. Louis, Missouri in the U.S., and just did a Twitter thing once, like who would like to go to lunch with me and a friend, and had a few random strangers come in and say, hey, we'll go. And so we went to lunch, and I ended up sitting across from a person that I met that day, and turns out he lives in the city I moved to, which is Pittsburgh. Right. And he not only, just went to this conference, but he's kind of the leader of a bunch of community things in town. And so as soon as I moved to Pittsburgh, I'm like, wait, Justin's here. And immediately he got me involved in the community and a bunch of activities he's doing here. So that random happenstance of networking, 900 miles away from where I live ended up happening.
Yeah.
Kind of paying off in the end.
Yeah, that's good. So that's some of the good points about conferences. Now, you mentioned there that even if you are a little bit scared of the number of people that are there, you should go. Don't let that put you off. But I think the other thing that puts a lot of people off is, aren't they really expensive to attend?
Yeah, unfortunately, conferences are usually in big, giant venues, and those cost a lot of money. Hotels, charge, I don't know, 10, 20, 30,000 to hold a venue there. If you're going to a conference center, that could be very well $50,000 or more. So the conference people have to make up their funds somewhere. And so usually that's through sponsorships and through ticket sales. And, the vast majority of it comes in from sponsorships and, a little bit less through ticket sales. So they are usually a bit expensive. I've seen ones anywhere from about $100 to, I think, one of them I went to was well over 1,000. It's, feel free to convert that to pounds or whatever. I realize I'm talking very much U.S. centered, but they're pretty expensive. Often companies will pay for them. So if you can find one, you can talk to your company like, hey, I think I'll learn a lot from this particular conference. They might be able to justify the cost. Some have scholarships. So if you're like a freelancer or, you have some other sort of non-typical, I don't work for a corporation kind of scenario, you can usually get a conference to help pay for it if you can say like, hey, I'm unemployed or I'm not making very much money right now. They can't afford a ticket. They can usually either make them drastically cheaper or just totally offset the cost. And I've seen some scholarships even cover not just cost of that, but cost of the travel, cost of the hotel, cost of things like that too.
Nice. Yeah. I know when I went down to London earlier this year that I run my own software business, which is just me. So my business paid for it, but it still felt like it was money out of my pocket. but if you work for a bigger company that's then more than just yourself, then it's always nice to see if they will help with the costs, if not pay for it for you.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because I've been to like 60 different events now, but none of my companies have ever been willing to pay for it. I think one ended up paying for it because I sponsored it, but and so it's just kind of like I've had to find other ways to pay for these, and usually it's through speaking, like they'll cover my travel and everything. But
yeah, I know some of them do pay for your travel and accommodation if you need to come into the area for the talk, which I think is very good because a lot of these conferences, when the speakers come on, they're not paid. They're there of their own volition, so it's nice that the conferences actually pay for their expenses to at least some point.
Yeah, and so they are expensive. There's often ways around it to either reduce it or help get it covered. So it depends on the conference, depends on the organizers of it. But, it doesn't, if you look at the website for the conference and see there's a lot of value in it, or people have said, this is really great, I learned a lot of great things from it, there's definitely, do a little bit of research. You can probably find a way to help offset the cost some.
Sure. So if you're not able to attend a conference, maybe you live in an area where they don't happen, or like we said about cost, maybe it's out of your real financial reach. Is there any sort of disadvantage for you not attending conferences? Are you going to be able to sort of progress your career without going to these things?
I think any person that wants to advance their career can find other ways to get sort of continuing education. There's some like online courses, like we mentioned, kind of books or video tutorials, things like that as well. So I see it as one type of way to get an education, to advance your career. And a lot of conferences even record the sessions as they happen and post them online. So, if you heard great things about some particular conference, you can always jump on YouTube or confreaks.com and see if there's any of the sessions from that particular conference online, and you can sort of like vicariously go through the internet.
Be there in a virtual form.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I've seen a few online webinars and things like that, which have been attended by a lot of people. So I think there are other options out there. I'd say to listeners, don't feel pressured into wanting to go, and if you can't attend, don't feel like you are completely missing out and ruining your career by not attending these conferences.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's other ways to get that continuing education. I've even seen some entirely virtual conferences. Like there's no space; it is all entirely online.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and that would definitely appeal to all you introverts out there that don't want to go out and interact with people. And as I was informed on Twitter earlier this week, most of us do type on a keyboard in a basement in the dark, and that's where we like to be. After I poked fun at Microsoft's new lighter theme for Windows 10, and saying, no, we use dark themes because we don't like the bright lights.
Yes, we all live in a basement, and we have like a whole wall covered in monitors, and
Exactly. That's exactly how we all live.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
So we mentioned in the introduction that you are the director of programming for Abstractions conference.
Yes.
What is the Abstractions conference?
That's a good question. So Abstractions is a conference. We're calling it a cross-discipline conference. So we're making sure we have lots of sessions that you could go to for if you're a developer, if you work in DevOps, if you're a manager, if you're a designer, if you work in like QA or support. We try to cover enough bases because we really think it's important to make sure we, have great content for, everybody in the development space. It's not just programmers out there. There's all sorts of people that really are involved in the software process, and we want to cover all of that as much as we can. So we're trying to organize a conference that has enough great material for whatever your branch of the software world is.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because I think before we decided to record this, we'd talked about the conference a little bit, and we'd said that it was cross-discipline, and I'd obviously wrongly assumed it meant it was going to be Python and JavaScript and C# and it's that, but it's not just across those sort of platforms. It's for everybody in tech, whichever department that you fall into, be that BAs or PMs or QAs or anything like that. There's something for everybody.
Yeah, and we are trying to do, cross language too. So, we have some web stuff, we have some mobile stuff, we have some, Python, and I don't even remember what all the talks are. But, we really want to sort of bridge that gap, because I feel like as we go on and our software gets a lot more complicated, we end up kind of having to cross those boundaries of, well, you're not just a developer. Sometimes you're a front-end designer developer, and sometimes you're a, developer, but you have to toy with the AWS. And, we cross those boundaries that don't make us just a Python developer anymore.
Yeah.
And so I like the idea that, I can go learn things specifically in what I want, but I could also go learn things in maybe what I'm interested in, or, I got stuck in a thing once and I don't know how to do it. Maybe I can go to a session and learn how to do it.
Sure. So it's, there's nothing like taking on a small task of running a conference, but then blowing it up into what really, I said small task, but a bit tongue in cheek. But what was a big task into an absolute mammoth of a task to do that. So being director of programming, I guess there's a lot of you that actually organise this event.
Yeah, we have about 8 core director people. So programming, talent, we have marketing, we have sponsorship, a few other people, as well as a couple people in charge. And so we're trying to, there's sort of that hierarchy, but we have a few other people we're working with to kind of try and ease some of those tasks. And as we get closer to the start of it, I know we're going to be bringing in more people because, everything sort of comes together at the last minute.
Yeah.
As they say, like 80% of the work happens in the last 20%. Or whatever.
So I guess your conference is based in the States somewhere?
Yeah, we'll be in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And do people have to attend in person to see the talks? I know you mentioned about recording talks before.
Yeah, we are talking with some sponsors about trying to pay for video recording. Again, conferences are expensive, and so is video recording. We're going to have approximately 10 talks at the same time, give or take. We're kind of ironing out the specific number at the moment. So, recording 10 talks at the same time through 3 days is really, really expensive. So we may not be able to cover it. But yeah, the best experience really is in person because we have other activities set up that I think are going to help enhance the experience of not just like learning things at the sessions, but having other activities and things to do there as well.
Yeah. It's really good, and as you say, these things aren't cheap to run. So finding some help out there to actually get it streaming and cover the cost of that would be fantastic. If there's any listeners out there that can help, maybe get in touch with Sarah and offer assistance on that. I'm sure that'd be greatly received.
We would definitely love to have any extra companies that would love to be involved in our conference. So hit us up.
Yeah. And I've not managed to get over to the States ever yet. The closest I've got is Mexico. And I'm planning to come over and bring the podcast with me at some point next year. There's a few of us talking about coming over and seeing people.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, so trying to get to some conferences as well would be really good. But being from the UK, whenever we go outside of it, we go into Europe or you go over to the States, you realise how small the UK actually is compared to everywhere else in the world. And you have these grandiose ideas of, I want to go here and there and everywhere. And you realise that they're days and days apart. It's not possible to get everywhere.
Yeah, I just got back from a conference in Oslo, Norway.
Yep.
And, I'm so used to it taking like many, many, many hours to fly across the U.S. And they ended up sending me on a layover in Copenhagen on the way there. And so we just flew all the way over the ocean to Copenhagen and it just like popped really quickly over to Norway. And just like, wow, that's like Europe's so tightly compact. It feels kind of weird that I'm jumping countries and it's not taking that long.
Yeah, there was a couple of guys that I work with. They were over in Oslo as well last week. So it's one I wasn't able to attend, which I would have liked to. But we can't do everything. I can't do everything.
Oh yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah. So a lot of the conferences that you see out there are very much aimed at a particular technology or a particular discipline. Are there any real big benefits to attending a multidisciplinary conference over maybe one that's aimed at your particular stack?
Yeah, kind of like I said, I think, as our software grows a lot more complicated, I think it's getting to that point where we sort of have to cross into other little areas more often. We might have to deal with a little bit of our own infrastructure. We might, if you're in the developer, or you're a manager, you might not understand like all of the technology, and maybe you could hop into a session where you understand like, hey, my team does, I don't know, we work in the cloud and I don't really understand the cloud. Maybe you could go get an introduction to, cloud development and kind of, not do this huge deep dive. Like you don't need to take a 20-hour class on how to learn how to do this, but you could always get a good introductory dive in a, 40-minute session.
Sure.
And so I like this idea of being able to sort of branch out of, where you might be stuck in your particular job, but also see what's going on out there in the industry, see how other people are doing things, and maybe learn a bit more about an aspect of your job that you might have to do, but don't really know as much how to do it.
Yeah, I guess, for the likes of people out there that are maybe a manual tester or QA, and they could attend something that teaches them or gives them a taster of automatic or automated testing, or even actual dev work and stuff like that. Or you could even take it the other way and be more managerial with the project management side. I guess they can go and get a taster of what goes on over there.
Yeah, like one good example is, I've done test-driven development as a developer myself, but I've just learned that there's, I don't even remember the name of it, like mutating tests, where the tests like change some of the code and some of the examples that are passed into it. And I'm like, that's kind of trippy.
Yeah.
And it sounds really interesting. And that's not something I, probably would have heard about naturally until it becomes a little bit more mainstream, perhaps. But like I wouldn't have the foggiest idea how to get started on that. So this would be easier to, go and see like a real example that somebody who has done this pulled off, more so than me trying to jump on, mutatingtesting.com and try to read through a terrible example online.
Yeah. We did an episode about different types of testing, and that testing was mentioned, and it just sounds so wrong to me. It's one of those things is that you write tests and that it's a known state that you're testing for. So if you run it once, you run it twice, you run it 3 times, it's going to run the same every time. But these tests put you on the first road to insanity, which is repeating the same thing and expecting different outcomes, which is actually what could happen.
Yeah. And I think we got a submission. It was something along the lines of like, why our company succeeds at pushing to prod. And I'm like, what? Like they develop in prod. And I'm like, this is like a terrible dumpster fire. And I absolutely want to go see it.
Yeah. I think we probably all worked in companies that do that. We don't test. We test on live. But that's one step further. We don't develop on a computer. We develop on live. Cool. So if listeners wanted to find out more about conferences in general and conference such as the Abstractions conference, where should they go? Where can they find out more information?
Oh, good question. If you want to learn more about abstractions in general, we're abstractions.io. In terms of just conferences in general, I don't know that I know any good resources to just kind of learn about them. But you're always welcome to reach out to me directly. I would love to chat more about if you pondered going to one, or I'm not quite sure what you would get out of it. I would always be willing to chat with somebody on Twitter or LinkedIn or somewhere and just find out what your questions are and what, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to go, and maybe kind of think through the different logistics of all that.
Yeah, and I guess there's Eventbrite or Meetup, and sometimes they're on there. And anybody out there looking for a real tough, almost impossible task for a side project, maybe develop a system that takes all these conferences and puts them on a website somewhere so they're easy for people to find. That'd be nice.
There's also sites like papercall.io where you can get a list of like all the conferences that are currently in their submission process. It's a little harder to find them like when they're in an attendable process, I think. But you could probably definitely look for, do a search for conferences in my city and get a list every year of, certain conferences in January or August or whatever, and definitely see what's kind of coming close to you. Because, if you don't have to pay for hotels or anything, they're definitely a lot cheaper too.
Oh yeah, definitely. And as long as they've got a good website and good SEO, they're easy to find. I know my local meetup, Chester Devs, it's been going for many years, and I only stumbled across it by accident a couple of years ago. So it is worth getting out there and talking to people, find out where they're going and what's going on as well. But I think that's about it for today. I don't want to take up any more of your very busy schedule as it is already. So it just leaves me to say thank you for coming on and talking to us about conferences today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been fun. Awesome,
and I hope that the listeners out there have got something from today's show, and maybe they'll look at going to a conference, maybe even start their own conference if there isn't anything in the local area. So that'd be really, really interesting to see what comes of that. And as always, thank you to everybody out there listening to The Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Sarah Withee talking about developer conferences. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.